Hey, everybody. How's it going? Welcome back to another exciting episode of Eggs. This week, we've got special guest Mark Daoust. Mark is the founder of Quiet Light Brokerage, an organization made up of Mark and a team of advisors who specialize in selling high-value online businesses. With over 10 years of experience, Mark and his team have helped hundreds of small business owners and entrepreneurs maximize the value of their e-commerce, SaaS, and content-based businesses as they strategize on the most profitable exit possible. Mark prides himself on working tirelessly with the client's best interest in mind, even if that means not working in his own best interest. Mark is a regular contributor to Entrepreneur and has been featured in Inc., Forbes, the Huffington Post, among others, and most recently here today on Eggs. So, without any further ado, we're excited to have him, and we are looking forward to our conversation. Join me in welcoming our guest, Mark Daoust.
Hey, Mark, how's it going?
Good. Thanks for having me on the show.
Yeah, thanks for making the time for us. Been excited to talk with you. Can you give us a little brief overview of your work history? Kind of like we usually kind of go back to high school as a starting point and kind of go from there. Like what happened in it from end of high school to current.
End of high school, man. You're making me actually think about this.
I know, right?
Well, and if you don't want to dig that deep, I mean, basically what we're trying to get to is the where did it all begin for you?
Yeah, no, I made a vow when I was probably in junior high that I was never going to work in fast food. I can't say that I actually lived up to that. I had a stint at Domino's. Pizza Hut, as a pizza delivery driver. One of the best jobs of my life, by the way. I got to just drive my car during the summer, had the windows down, listen to music. It was great.
Yeah, right. That's a pretty good setup if you can get it.
Yeah, and the money was good too. You know what I used to do? I used to take the tip money that I would get, and you would get like all these ones, right? So I'd have this big wad of bills, but then I'd put a 20 on the outside of it, so it made it look like I had all that sort of cash. Most of my work history in high school was sales. So I did basically like prospecting over the phone, and then I also got into various inbound call center jobs. Right, so I would do things like I was selling these gold-plated Michael Jordan cards or coins and collectible items like that.
I remember those Michael Jordan cards.
Yeah, those were really cool.
Yeah. I have done some call center work, but luckily for you, it was inbound because the outbound calls is no fun.
Well, I gotta say, I did both.
Okay.
The inbound stuff is a lot more fun than the outbound stuff. I'll tell you that. The outbound stuff can be kind of brutal, but you know what? It was a really good lesson because, like in sales, one of the best things that you can learn to handle is rejection, right? And the first time somebody yells at you and hangs up, you're kind of shook by it, but then after like, I don't know, 20 times, you're like, whatever, it's fine.
On to the next.
Move on. So yeah, I did a lot of that. And then in college, I got a job. So kind of a funny story. I got a job with a company called Alabanza. This was my senior year, and I was doing call center work in college as well. And so my senior year, there's this position I didn't really care too much about the job, and I thought, you know what, I've never been fired before. I wonder what it's like to be fired. So I got this job thinking I'm going to get fired one day. And of course, what happened is they promoted me and ended up giving me a job right out of college. Really, really nice job. Moved to Baltimore, worked with them for 2 years. This was like around 2000. And I mean, internet-based companies were just exploding like crazy. And they were exploding until they didn't. And they completely imploded. And one day the business imploded. And, long story short, I survived a lot of that until eventually I did get fired. So
you got everything the promotion, but it just took a little longer than thought.
You know what? I no longer wanted to be fired at that point. Kind of sucked. I was like, no. So yeah, that was kind of the quick overview of what my work history was. A lot of sales background.
So were you always entrepreneur, like driven like as an entrepreneur? Like, have you always wanted to go into business for yourself, or was that sort of a change of direction forced by something else?
Yeah, I would say yes. I always did have kind of a desire to do the entrepreneurial thing. But I was really pushed there when I did get let go from that position. It was really kind of a stark reminder to me because I got let go for political reasons, right? I wasn't playing the corporate game where I was, letting people know what I'd been doing work-wise. And I ended up getting caught in the crosshairs of the CEO of the company wanting somebody in my department to get let go. And because I didn't get along with my boss very well, and this is me again being kind of an idiot at the time, not understanding how this works, I was the one that got axed. And this idea that I got let go from a position when it wasn't really based on performance. I was the second highest grossing person in my position in the company, and I had a lot of reputation in the industry. So this idea that I could get let go, even with the numbers supporting the fact that I was doing good work, was kind of a like, ah, man, you know, I would rather all of a sudden be out of paycheck because I didn't do good work. And so that's what really pushed me into that entrepreneurial career. I'd always played around with it, and I'd been looking around at some options before, but it wasn't until I got fired that I really got pushed into it pretty heavily.
Yeah, I think that that's kind of a common thing, or at least, I mean, in my life, that's the same. I mean, before I took my first jump into business, it took me being laid off by a company. And, so for me, kind of the same thing. I needed that nudge. I was always a little bit entrepreneurial, but I'd have never made the leap if I hadn't been forced.
Yeah, but you made the leap once, and then you went and got another job, and then you had to make it again later. So it's it's happened to you twice. It's happened to me once. I was driving a truck for a little while and got in an accident that wasn't my fault and lost my job. And so it pushed me out into the entrepreneurial world as well. So it's crazy how that seems to be a common thing.
It's a scary thing to jump into that entrepreneurial world. But you know what? At the time, I was 23, and I went from having a job, living on my own in Baltimore. I had a really nice apartment, because I was making good money out there, and I went from that to moving into my parents' basement. And what do you have to lose at that point?
Right.
Not much. You're already in your parents' basement, so it made it a little easier to take that jump.
Sure, that makes sense. So let's talk. So I guess, was that first jump into self-employment or whatever, was that Quiet Light, or did it begin as something else?
No, it began with something else. So back then, this was 2003, I think. Right now, everyone knows AdWords. AdWords is like the PPC champion, is what everyone kind of associates with this. But they weren't the first ones to do this, right? The first company was actually Go.com. They were the first PPC search engine. And then a bunch of other companies kind of joined into that jump, and there wasn't really a leader out there. So I developed a search engine that was pay-per-click, and had a little bit of a spin on it. But I was working a job, call center, inbound call center, taking orders, supervising that department. And when I would come home to my parents' basement, I would work on this search engine and having it developed. And then when I officially launched, we went from $0 to $3,000 monthly recurring revenue overnight. And
Wow.
yeah, it was one of those moments of like, oh my gosh, now I actually have to deliver to all these people. It was exciting but scary at the same
So
time.
can you talk about that first 6-7 month period of growth and how you some hurdles that might have come up, some things you weren't expecting that you had to address really quickly, because now you have the product going and you can't take a month and we'll just launch it in a month or two, but now it's going, you have your product, you have to fix it, and I'm sure the heartburn is much more intense once the product's up.
Well, I'll tell you what happened actually, because yeah, it was obviously like with this, the people were paying me a monthly fee for me to deliver traffic. And so the big thing was, okay, I got to get traffic to these listings. And um, I was going through different things. And one day I decided to go into the database to try and fix something up. And I deleted everything.
Oh
Like
No.
man.
everything. Now, so imagine this, you're a website owner back then, and you sign up with our service, and then you upload 1,500 keywords and optimize listings for all of these keywords. And then you get an email from the owner saying, sorry, I just deleted
Deleted everything.
all of
Oh
your
my
work.
goodness.
So what happened is, out of my 120 clients or so, I mean, obviously people were pissed and everyone left, and I got massive levels of chargebacks, and I got a call from the merchant account saying, "Sorry, we're dropping you." It was right before Thanksgiving, so I didn't make it a full 6 months with that. I lost my merchant account, and it's like, crap, what do I do? Now, fortunately, at the time, I had started something else with a partner that I knew was short lived. It was search arbitrage, or I mean, let's not put a nice word on it. It was spamming the search engines is really what it came down to. We were spinning up these websites that were like 20,000, 30,000 page websites that were all based off of scraping Dogpile, which is an old search engine, right? So we were able to get massive amounts of traffic with this. Once we had the Google dance happen, as they called it back then, we would go from basically a no traffic website to having 50,000 visitors a day on these pages. It was pretty remarkable, and then making a lot of money on AdSense ads. But I still had this other business, so I knew that this search thing that we were doing wasn't going to last. It was good money for a very short amount of time. So I ended up making the search engine that I built free, and ended up getting a lot of people submitting to it, just because it was like a directory basically. And that was good because I was able to use that and turn it into a newsletter and a content website, because all the people that were submitting to me were looking for information on internet marketing and digital marketing. And so that's really what I focused on. And that was, if you want to say, okay, what was your first legit business? That was the first legit business. I pivoted that into a website called Site Reference, which was all about search engine optimization, paid marketing, and this kind of bootstrapper mentality that we still see living today, just a little bit differently than it was back then.
Yeah. So is Rand Fishkin one of your idols?
Rand Fishkin made it impossible to do what I was doing back then. I sold that business 2 years after. I actually bought it back later on. And when I looked at it after I bought it, I'm like, I'm not going to be able to compete against people like Rand.
Right.
Like they're doing such a good job with this. So I ended up running it for about a year, and then just kind of putting it to rest peacefully.
Okay. Well, so where to from there? Then is this when Quiet Light starts to come around?
Yeah. So I sold that company, and then I had a couple ventures that I was working on for the next year, and they weren't really taking off. I mean, I was seeing some decent traction, but I wasn't seeing enough where I was like feeling really good about it. And meanwhile, my bank account was quickly dwindling, because I sold Site Reference. You get a big pile of cash, you think I've made it, and you don't realize how quickly that money goes away. It goes away pretty quick if you don't have something else lined up. And then a good friend of mine from the web hosting days came back to me and said, hey, I saw you sold your business. I'm thinking about selling mine. Do you want to help me? And I always thought, like, when I was going through that sales process, I'm like, man, this broker got 10% of my work. How sweet is that? Like, you didn't have to do anything. You just had to sell it. And so I said what's, so commonly we say as entrepreneurs, and probably a huge mistake to say. I'm like, how hard could it be to do this? Turns out pretty hard. And I did help this buddy of mine sell his business. And literally I'm not making this up. I was going broke the day that I got the commission on the day that we closed. So like I had automatic payments going out, and I had, the only money to my name was whatever was in the couch cushions. And at this point I was married, so completely different story. I'm not living in my parents' basement. There's a little bit more consequence if you go broke at this point.
Yeah. I've had multiple experiences like that where you think, oh, it's gonna overdraft today, and then something comes through, and it's I think it's just part of growing a small business.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah,
I mean,
I think so too. I think it's a really common experience.
I've unfortunately had that experience a number of times, even with Quiet Light in the first few years, where you go on a trip and you're like, boy, I hope I have enough money for the gas.
Well, so let's talk a little
you're
bit
right, it's
more
part of
about,
the experience.
about Quiet Light itself and sort of what the business is. So essentially it's a website brokerage, right? But maybe help us explain more in detail what that means even.
Yeah. So what we do is we help. So again, I sold my business, now 14 years ago, something like that, my first business. And the person that helped me, they helped me prepare it, and then they found buyers and helped negotiate the whole process. So what we do at Quiet Light Brokerage is we help online business owners who are looking to sell. We help them prepare their business for sale, do evaluation so that they can understand what their business is worth. My current business partner does this really cool exercise, and I'll actually ask you to this question and start out really simple. Do you know about how much you have in your checking account right now?
Yeah.
Probably, right?
Yeah,
Do you
sure.
know about how much you have in your retirement account?
Yeah, fair.
Probably. If you have a house, you probably know approximately what it's worth. But then the question for anyone that's an entrepreneur, do you know how much your business is worth? And also, do you know what's driving its value or what's holding its value back? And the fact is, most of us who are entrepreneurs and who have a successful business, our business is one of our most valuable assets that we own, if not the most valuable asset that we own. And so just like a stock portfolio, your retirement account, or your checking account, you should have a grasp as to what it's worth. Not because I want you to sell it. If you want to, I'm gladly help you. But more importantly, it's part of the value and net worth that you're building, and you want to build it in such a way that asset value grows. So that's a lot of what we do, right? We do a lot of education in the entrepreneurial space with the understanding that that's going to help us in the long run. When people do hire us, what we do is we help them find a buyer, negotiate that whole process, really guide them through the process, because it gets really complex. It can be a difficult process to go through and bring people to a successful close.
Yeah, no, I think that's really great, and it's funny, I just read this book, you've probably come across it then, just that given this is your line of work, it's called, Built to Sell, and, for people like me, like I run an advertising agency, a marketing agency, and so for me, this book, Built to Sell, he does everything under the sort of the guise or the fictitious story of a made-up advertising agency, and it was the first time I'd put any thought whatsoever to maybe how to exit this business, and, more than that, it had a lot to do with just trying to get it set up for sale in the event I get hit by a bus or something. I've got a couple young kids now, and my whole like focus has shifted a little bit to that of legacy. It was something I never put any thought to, in previous years. And so reading this book was really helpful. And so it sounds like you guys generate a lot of resources and things around helping people start to processize their business or sort of form something that's sellable.
Yeah, absolutely. And really this is born from experience, right? Because we've had so many people come to us who they never thought about selling their business, but one day they woke up and they thought it's time, right? For some reason something changed. Now it's time to sell my business. And there can be a lot of reasons for that. But then when they actually come to us, we look at it, we have to tell them, we can sell your business as it is right now, but you're going to take a huge hit on its value. You could get X more amount of dollars if you did A, B, C, and D. But A, B, C, and D takes 12 months or takes 18 months. Or, more dramatically, sometimes people bake something into their business, which makes it really difficult to sell at all. Or the process can be very, very complex. Or they make it to a mistake that makes the business literally unsellable. And those are situations that obviously we don't want to see.
Can you break those down for us so we can avoid those in our own business?
Yeah, absolutely. There's four key principles that we talk about when trying to build a sellable business. We call them the four pillars of value: risk, growth, transferability, and documentation. Those are the four key principles. Risk is pretty simple, but sometimes you need somebody on the outside to help you see that risk. So we're looking for what can happen that would make your business either go away or damage your business really bad if it happened. So let's talk about an e-commerce business that has only one vendor and one vendor only. What happens if that vendor goes out of business? What happens if they decide to start competing against you directly? Those would be areas of risk. Or let's say that you have a business where you have one client that makes up 50% of your revenue. That's another area of risk that we want to look out for. I joked back in the early days, I got all of these requests to sell MySpace wallpaper websites. All of a sudden, I'm like, what is going on in the MySpace wallpaper websites space? Well, obviously MySpace was going away. And so all those companies built in risk because they built themselves up on the success of MySpace. And we know how that went, right?
Yeah.
So there's risk. Second of all would be growth. And we're looking for, obviously, the past trends. Are you in the middle of growing right now? And what does the future of the business hold? We've got to be careful because everyone comes to us, they're like, man, my business could be the next fill in the blank, right? There's so much potential in it. But what I want to see is what's the path to get to that potential? Like, how realistic is it? Can you demonstrate this for me? What needs to be done? If somebody just threw more advertising dollars at this one, that doesn't really work. I want to see specifically what is that growth potential. We have to keep in mind, like, we're still selling something, right? And so the person buying wants something in return. And what they want is a return on their investment. So you got to speak to that. And that's really where that comes from. The third thing would be the transferability. Make sure that the business isn't reliant on you. Um, Make sure that you're not the face of the business, right? Neil Patel talks about this on his blog, how if he were to start over again, he would not name it after himself because he's building something that is really, really difficult to sell because nobody else in the world is Neil Patel. He's great at what he does. And now the perception is he's the only one that's ever going to be able to do that. And that's a problem. So we also want to look at, do you have standard operating procedures? Can you plug it? Like if you have employees, can you plug anybody else in if one of them gets hit by a bus? And also, are there any restrictions from people operating your business? And then last, documentation. This is the biggest mistake that we see people make because it's 100% in your control. Good, clean financials, good, clean, separated books. Make sure it's verifiable. At the end of the day, the most difficult part about selling a business is all the requests for documentation you're going to get. So being organized up front makes a big difference on that. And, a buyer or an acquirer might love you. They might love your business. They might trust you, but they don't seven-figure write a check trust you. They're going to take a look at all the documentation to verify what you got. And people miss this step all the time. And this is honestly where we spend a lot of time telling people, you got to do this before you can sell. And it's usually, a few $1,000 of going back and recasting books. And let me tell you, if you've ever tried to recast financials for the last 3 years, it is a pain to go through, but it's necessary.
So when you guys onboard a client and you start doing work with them, how much of this coaching process is part of that? So like, let's say I approach you guys and say, hey, look, I've got this online shop. It's starting to be, I don't know, it's too big a part of my day. I'd like to try and sell this thing. And you guys start to look at it. You start to discover some of these issues that we're describing, maybe the documentation issue or, maybe, all the way back down to process or somebody having their face on the brand. What do you do in terms of, so you might point out some of these questions, but does your firm help walk them through these changes? And is that part of the sort of the broker relationship, or do you kind of give them a list of marching orders and then have them circle back around when they're ready for you?
It depends on what needs to be done. I mean, we'll help where we can. And oftentimes that's referring somebody to the right resource. So for example, books are a common problem. And so we have a number of accountants and bookkeepers that we recommend. We don't get paid by them. They're just people that we've worked with in the past and have had good experience with, right? If there are other problems with the business, we'll work with somebody to develop a strategy. One of the cool things about Quiet Light Brokerage is that everybody that works in this advisory role, we're all entrepreneurs, right? We've all bought, we've all sold, we've all started significant online enterprises. I just bought a business 2 years ago that was nearly $1 million. So I'm still active in this game. Most of my advisors have multiple businesses to their name as well. So you're basically working with another entrepreneur who has extensive experience in the buying and selling process. So when we look at the business, we can say, I know that this part of your business, it's going to be a bit of an issue. If it's something we haven't seen before, we can usually craft a strategy together. It's going to be up to our clients to execute the strategy. And after all, it's their business, right? There are some things that maybe they just don't want to do. And we've had this happen as well, where we talk to somebody and say, great business, but this aspect of it's a little bit off. I would recommend going off and changing this. And I think you're going to add value to the business. And I've had people come back and say, that's great. I see it. Don't want to do it. And let's just sell it for what we can get now. That's totally fair as well.
Yeah, no, I think that's got to be difficult for a business owner to try and be really introspective and take a look at this stuff. And I guess that it's probably a little bit of a cost benefit analysis too, where they have to determine, is the gain worth all the extra effort? Can you talk a little bit about sort of the key concepts behind buying and selling websites? So, who is your ideal prospect? What kinds of projects are you looking for? And what kind of criteria, I mean, we talked, about the sort of business internal parts, but what sort of criteria do you have on your side for buying and selling?
Yeah, sure. So we're typically working with established online businesses, and that can be a little bit flexible, but we're looking for something that has some staying power to it, right? So we work with Amazon e-commerce businesses, we work with SaaS applications, we work with content sites, pretty much anything that's online, even service businesses as well, like online marketing agencies or design firms or website development firms. And what we're looking for really when we're evaluating if it's a good fit for us is we're actually looking at those 4 pillars and trying to see, are they checking enough boxes here? And then we also want to understand your motivations. Why do you want to sell your business? And what are your goals from an exit? And a lot of it is, can we actually help you achieve those goals? I would say that we're really, really good at helping people who have a business that's been established for 2, 3, 4 years find a buyer and get probably the top end market price. Now, if you're looking for us to go out and dial up all of your competitors, we'll do that, but that's not really in the core competency of what we do, and frankly, most people, and it's usually a low percentage type sale. So we're looking at for people that want to sell, they have a good reason that they're trying to exit their company, and they have a good sense for what the market is going to pay and want to get that top end market rate. And so that's one of the criteria that we're looking for. I guess at the end of the day, the biggest thing that we're looking for is somebody that we can partner with as well. I mean, we really do like to think about this as going into battle with our clients, right? Once we sign that contract and once we're off to the races, we're there side by side with you to try and get that successful outcome with your goals. And we're looking for people that are going to partner with us in the same way. So it's a two-way street.
Yeah. So say, for example, I've got a $500,000. I want to go and buy an online business. What should I be doing? Do you accommodate the buyers as well, or is it you focus mainly on the sellers?
Yeah, buy side is a little more tricky. We do focus mainly on the sellers. I mean, that's who we will sign our contract with, and technically where our money comes from, although we get paid out of the transaction, right? So it's still both buyer and seller's money. But on the buy side, right now there's so many buyers out there, and deal flow is obviously the most difficult thing. So for example, if I put a new listing out there for let's say $1.5 million, I would expect within the first 48 to 72 hours to get 150 to 200 inquiries from potential buyers, right? Wow. So you can see how competitive it is on the buy side. That said, we do work with buyers and we will consult with buyers. In fact, probably most of our time is spent doing just that. And a lot of our podcast as well is focused on how to become a good buyer and win these deals. Part of this is self-serving, right? We want to work with better buyers and trying to help people win deals. And so we do work with buyers. We will float things out to buyers on a case-by-case basis. But for the most part, because we are working with our clients, we want to make sure that we're getting the best deals for them. So we are going to expose it to multiple buyers as well. But for anyone out there who maybe you're trying to do an acquisition and it's not through Quiet Light, we advise on these deals all the time, just on the side, like, hey, somebody might approach me and say, hey, I'm buying this business. Would you mind taking a look at it for me? See if I'm making a huge mistake. I'm more than happy to dip in and take a look and give my opinion on something.
Yeah, that's awesome. So can we talk a little bit about exit planning then? So you mentioned earlier or touched on the idea that, planning for an exit doesn't mean you have to exit. It's just planning as if or being prepared. Can you talk about, the importance of exit planning, what it really means, and, who should be considering it, or maybe everybody should, but can we just talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I'll start out by saying everybody should. And then I'm going to back that up by saying if you have a business that's making money that you currently enjoy and is fulfilling your life, you should not sell it, but you should still be prepared to sell it. And a couple of reasons why I think exit planning is really important. One, you have no idea what the future holds. Again, most of our clients come to us, they want to sell, but they had never planned on selling their business. Something changed in the landscape of their life, right? Where all of a sudden this business doesn't work for them anymore. Oftentimes it's still a really, really good business. But, we see people, let's talk about why do people want to sell? Sometimes it's that when you are growing a business, you go through these increases, then plateaus, right? When you plateau, you have to kind of gear up for that next growth stage, and then you plateau again, and then you have to gear up to the next growth stage as well. A lot of times, this is learning how to scale your business. So maybe you start out as that solopreneur, and you reach that first plateau and you say, you know what, I need to start hiring some people to come in and take some of the load off my plate. And you do that and it grows to the next stage. You're like, great, that's sweet. Now I can expand into this new product line, and that's going to take some hustle. And then you grow and then you plateau. At a certain point, a lot of people look at that and they take a look at that next growth stage and they say, yeah, not interested. That's more than I want to do.
Yeah.
And so what are your options at that point? And so maybe selling at that point does make sense. Or on the, frankly, the darker side, sometimes life just kind of kicks you in the face, right? And all of a sudden your business doesn't become the most important thing in your life. I mean, we've worked with people who have received terminally ill diagnoses. And what do they want? They want to cash out, get money for their loved ones, and be able to enjoy their life. This is again on the darker side of things, but it does happen where we see this, and none of us are predicting that. I'll close this part out though with another reason that you want to do exit planning, not because of selling the business one day, but the process of exit planning helps you build a really, really good business to own. The fact is, if you have a great business to sell, it means it's a great business to own. So when you're going through and analyzing what are the risks to my business and how can I mitigate or have those redundancy plans to take care of these risks, that's a really good exercise that we normally wouldn't do as entrepreneurs, because we're usually always just pursuing that growth and not really protecting the downside. But we should be doing that. I've over 12 years, I can't tell you the number of times I've had people come to me with businesses where their numbers have fallen off the table, and now they're coming to me to sell because they never went through this risk mitigation strategy or exercise. Looking at reasonable growth plans instead of just having this kind of nebulous, like, well, if we just throw more ad dollars at it, actually putting together a growth plan is a really good idea. And most of us are doing this anyways, but it's a good experience to do. Creating standard operating procedures, making sure it's not dependent on you entirely, and having good documentation. My goodness, the documentation. As internet entrepreneurs, we love data, right? Data is awesome. One of the key pieces of data that most of us ignore are our financial records. We have no idea what it means. I ask people all the time, do you know if you're on cash basis or accrual basis accounting? And they go, I have no idea. I wouldn't even know what that means. Well, this is like, your financials are kind of like the pulse of your business. You should understand them. You don't have to be an accountant, but understand them, because this is like hundreds of years old, a system that's the hundreds and hundreds of years old, that's designed entirely to tell you the health of your business.
Right.
So take the time to understand this and make sure that it's clean. You're going to have insights into your business that you never had before. So that's why I'm a big advocate of exit planning. I do think most of us at some point or other will sell our business, and it's good to be prepared. But the other side of it, again, the fact that having a good business to sell is usually a good business to own as well.
So in your brokerage, I'm sure you have to get down and dirty and actually tell the truth to your clients, even though that you might not want to. I think you refer to it as reckless honesty. Can you break that down? Why it's so key and important to be recklessly honest?
Yeah, we've decided to change that to relentless honesty, because we don't want people to think that we're going to be reckless with their business. Internally, though, we do call it recklessly honest, because what it means for us internally here, like, we're success based only, right? So our fees are success based only. So I only get paid if I sell my client's business. But there are times when it's just best not to, for them. And look, I'm not going to make the decision at the end of the day, but I will tell you if you shouldn't sell your business. That might mean that I lose a commission. But at the end of the day, I'd rather sleep well at night, do the right thing by a fellow entrepreneur, and then down the road, I know that's going to come back in spades for me. The other aspect of being recklessly honest with clients, people come to us and they think that the business is worth a certain amount, and maybe it's not. And it can be really, really easy to try and get yourself talked into what they're saying, or really easy to try and kind of say, yep, that's exactly what your business is worth. Let's put it on the market, and then wait for the market to adjust and help them adjust their expectations. This happened to me when I sold my business, right? I went in with a certain number in mind, and then the broker said, no, your business is worth way more than that. I was like, well, really? Oh, okay, that's great. Like, let's go. I was super excited. Then I signed this really long contract with them. And then where did all the offers come in? Way below what he had told me.
Yeah, where you were thinking initially, probably.
Exactly. And in my head, I'm thinking, okay, so now I'm in this exclusive contract with this guy. And, I like to say the market, it's brutally honest, right? You're
Yeah.
going to learn what to expect from the market once you go out there. I would rather tell my client that from day one. And look, we lose business because of this, because some of our competitors will be out there and they're going to quote higher numbers. And it's really difficult. I can tell you just from that competitive nature of me, when I'm talking to somebody and they're like, hey, I talked to, competitor A and competitor B, and they quoted me a higher number. Boy, it's tempting sometimes for me to be like, all right, look, I think I can get this. Let me see if I can get that. The recklessly honest part says, you know what? I need to tell them, if you truly believe they can get that number for you, you should sign with them. I don't think that's where the market is, and I don't think you're going to get that. That's tough to do sometimes, but we do. And guess what? Most of those people come back to us.
Yeah.
They come back to us because the other broker tried to sell them, and they realized halfway through they completely overshot this. They were just trying to get me in. Now I got to wait 12 months or whatever the case may be.
So
And then they end up
what's the
signing with
normal
us.
term for a brokerage contract? Is it like a 6-month or 12-month, or I assume it's probably like a real estate agent or something similar to that effect. You got to have a little time to shop it.
Yep. So ours is 3 months, because I think 3 months is plenty of time. I already told you how many inquiries we get, right? I mean, if we're getting 120 to 200 inquiries within 48 to 72 hours, you're going to know pretty quickly if you're going to sell that business.
Yeah.
One of two things happens from that. You either hear, well, one of three things. You either get a buyer, or you get crickets, which is a bad sign, or you get this universal feedback of, looks great, but I don't want it because of fill in the blank, in which case you know where the objection is. Other brokerage terms, I don't actually know where they're at. I believe they're anywhere between 6 months and 12 months. And my understanding too is that they often use it as a negotiation point. We don't. We're really short, 90 days. And at the end of the day, if you don't like us after 45, I can't sell your business without you anyways. So I'm not going to sit there and hold your feet to the fire. If you're like, if we did something stupid and you're like, guys, you did something stupid, I don't like you anymore, whatever. Okay, we'll own that and just move on for everyone's benefit.
Yeah. What's this might be a little personal, but what's like a normal fee to expect for someone to come in and sell a business?
Yeah, it's going to vary from broker to broker.
Does it base it off of the value of the business too?
Yep, based off the value of the business. So anything under $1 million for us is 10%. Right now, we do have a $25,000 minimum. So like if your business is valued at $100,000, it doesn't make a lot of sense to work with us.
Sure.
We can still sell you. It's just going to be expensive for you to do that. Above $1 million, we use a scale where we do 10% on the first million, 9% on the second, 8% on the third, and then drops down to 4 and is a flat 4% fee above that. So it's a graduated scale once we get above $1 million.
Interesting.
Nice. So maybe this is a good time then to talk about it. So how does a person, or can you give any kind of guidelines or for how a person might establish value of their website? Obviously, having you guys come in and do a full blown valuation is the most valuable piece. But if I'm trying to get a ballpark, even just trying to get my head around the idea of, God, could this thing be worth some money? Are there some metrics or different things I can look at that, you at Quiet Light would sort of look into as well to establish a value?
Yeah, absolutely. So really great question. And it's not too difficult to get a ballpark valuation on your own business. You don't need me to tell you that. What you want to do is you want to have your bookkeeper or your accountant, or if you do it on your own, run a profit and loss statement on your business for the last 12 months that you have data, right? So if your books are current through March, run it from last April through this last March. And then you're going to take a look at that. You're going to have a few numbers on there. You're going to have your top line revenue. And if you're selling products or have cost of goods sold, you have your gross profit. And then you're going to have your net income. And with this, you can often back into EBITDA, right? Earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. So start with your EBITDA. This is your bottom line number. And then we're going to add back any owner benefits. So if you're a single owner, add back your salary. If you're paying for your car through your company, add that back as well, right? And that's going to get us to this a rough approximation of what we call owner's discretionary earnings. This is the key number, the key driver of value for most businesses. And the approach that we use is what's called the earnings multiplier approach. I think it's really important for people to understand something here, though. This approach, it's a predictor of value. It's a predictive formula. So we take into account a lot of things when we do evaluation, but you can generally predict the value of most businesses and what the market is willing to pay by using this multiplier approach, especially since most buyers are using the same approach. So the second question is, okay, well, we're going to multiply your owner's discretionary earnings by some number. What number do we multiply it by? The marketplace establishes a range of multiples for the type of business. And right now, that can be anywhere from, on the low end, 2 times your earnings, on the high end, 5 to 6 times. Most online businesses, and especially if you're valued, let's say $2 million or less, most are going to fall right around 3 to 3.5 times earnings. Right? Maybe a little bit less than 3, depending on the type of business. What changes? What makes a difference in the number? What niche you're in? So if you're like e-commerce, Amazon, you're right around 3 for the most part. Again, there's going to be some variance depending on your business and other factors. If you're a SaaS business that's growing, it can be higher, 4 to 5 times. If your EBITDA is north of $2 million, now you're in the much higher multiple range. And you're talking about much higher valuations as well, and more complex valuations. But I think for anyone out there listening, take a number right around 3. I think that's typically where you see the data start to really kind of group together. And then for, okay, what's kind of my sunny day, happy day scenario? Use 4. What's my sad, rainy day scenario? Use 2. And that's going to be a decent approximation for you.
Yeah, no, I think that's really interesting, because I think for a lot of people, like you were discussing earlier, I mean, if they don't have some kind of idea of what their business is, they may not even think about this idea of exiting or whatever. I mean, I guess it's not all going to be driven by money. Maybe they don't need the money per se to get out of their business, but maybe, having an understanding of that value. I liked how you put it, sort of about the understanding how much you have in checking and 401k and so on. I think that's really smart. So I guess, and you started to lead into this a little bit, but if I own a little online shop, are there a few things that I ought to do prior to coming to you? Like, are there things I can do to boost my valuation, sort of quickly, or be better prepared? I mean, assuming I've done these, 4 pillars and I've done some work on that, is there any sort of last ditch things I should be doing as a small business owner before I start approaching you to broker the deal?
Well, we did cover it a little bit already. I'll just double down on the documentation side. Making sure that your taxes match your financials, or at least you can back into it pretty easily. And this is something to think about. We see this mistake sometimes. Business owners, we hate paying taxes usually, right? And so what do? We often reduce that taxable income as much as possible. One of the things that you can do if you know you're going to sell your business, let's say you're thinking, okay, I'm definitely going to sell my business in 2020. You know what? When you file your taxes for 2019, don't reduce that income. It'll just make it that much easier to sell the business. A lot of buyers right now are using bank loans to acquire these businesses using the SBA. SBA requires that they can match things up with your tax returns. They can do a little bit of the math to understand where there's some accounting deductions like amortization and depreciation. They can also work in a few other nuances, but if you're too aggressive, it's going to be very difficult. And you want to be open to having somebody use a bank loan to acquire your business. It just opens you up to a whole nother level of buyers and can really push the value of your business north. But other than that, again, the documentation, I really can't emphasize enough. Depending on who you get as a buyer, it can be a real difficult process selling the business because of all the documentation requests and everything that they need. And being organized reduces the perceived risk for buyers, right? I had a situation 3 years ago. Yeah, 3 years ago now. The most organized seller I had ever worked with. She actually took the time to diagram her business out to say, here's how my marketing works over here. Here's the advertising platforms that I use and how it works into the marketing. Here's my supply chain over here. Here are the warehouses that I use. And the impact that this had both on me as the broker, but also on the potential buyers was I am seeing everything, right? So this buyer was saying, I'm seeing everything out there. There isn't the unknown, what's hiding beneath, the rug here that the seller doesn't even know about because she knows her business so well already. Buyers discount what they're willing to pay based off perceived risk or real risk, right? And if you reduce that perceived risk, you do get a higher valuation. It's a much faster sale, much cleaner sale, much less stressful sale. So those are all things that I would look at. And I guess the other thing that I would recommend people do before selling that we didn't cover is know what you want. Have a number in mind that you want. You don't have to tell us. You don't, or if you hire another broker, you don't have to tell them what that number is. But know what you want, and also know what you want outside of the offer as well. Are you looking just to get out and be done? Would you like to maybe get some upside on the business after you sell it? Identify some of these goals. What can happen when you're in the process of selling your business, especially if you have multiple people bidding on your business, it can become really tempting to be like, whoa, somebody came in, like we put this thing up for $500,000 and I got a full price offer day one. I think we underpriced this thing, right? And then you start thinking, well, maybe I'm going to push it a little bit more or push it even a little bit more. And the next thing you don't know what offer to accept, right? But the fact is, I told you how competitive it is right now among buyers. Most buyers understand when a good listing goes out, they need to put in a good offer right away. Consider it like a housing market. When the housing market's really strong, you put a house up for sale, it usually gets a full price offer really quickly. Understand in advance what's going to make me happy from the sale of this business. What's going to make me satisfied? And what we tell people to do sometimes is to write that down on a piece of paper, put it in an envelope, put it in the back of your drawer, because when you're 90% of the way through due diligence and you've been negotiating now for weeks, and you've given in on a few things, now you're thinking, well, everything's unfair, and now I'm going to ask this guy for more money. That's when you need to pull that sheet of paper back out and say, am I getting what I originally intended to get out of this sale? And make sure that I'm hitting these goals, and kind of that grounding factor to really help.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good strategy. Can we talk to about, so how much of business brokerage or business selling is based on trend? So like, I mean, is it good to monitor the trends, and are there ways to do this so that if you've got a company and you're interested in selling it, maybe it's I don't know, it's a downtime for social platforms versus a high time for e-commerce platforms. Is there a way to monitor these types of trends so that you can try and be prepared for sale, at the prime moment versus just, any random time trying to sell your site?
Yeah, really good question. The big thing that we look at right now would be the lending environment, because the lending environment introduces a whole set of buyers and acquirers that normally wouldn't be there. Right now, we're seeing one of the most aggressive acquisition markets that we've seen, frankly, since I started Quiet Light Brokerage. It was probably a little bit better when I first started Quiet Light, but that didn't last long. When we hit the recession in 2009, that made it really, really difficult to sell any business. And there was a really bad feedback loop that happened around that time, right? So what happened around 2009, we had the economy collapse. All bank lending dried up for these type of acquisitions. SBA, which backs a lot of these loans, came out and said, we're not going to lend any more than $200,000 on what they call blue sky acquisitions. And internet businesses are almost all blue sky. They're all goodwill sort of acquisitions. So that completely killed all of our lending from banks. And who did you have left in the market? You had a bunch of buyers out there that were bargain hunting, and they knew that they were bargain hunting. And most of the businesses on the market, frankly, couldn't get a high multiple because they were in decline. Everyone was down, had downward trends. And so the top multiples right around like 2009, 2010, the top multiples that we were seeing were about 2.5, maybe 2.7 on a really, really good business. And I remember talking to people like 2010, 2011, who had businesses now that were recovering and were growing. And they're asking, well, what do you think you can get from my business? And I would have to tell them, like, look, buyers are looking for businesses around 2.7 times your discretionary earnings. And they'd say, I would never sell for that. And my response was, good, I wouldn't sell for that either. And so what happened was the market was had this bad feedback loop where only bad businesses were allowed to be sold because people had this false idea that 2.7 was the most you should pay for a business. Now we've broken out of that, and we are seeing these higher multiples back in. But I think the trends that you really need to pay attention to would be the acquisitions market. We talk about it on Quiet Light podcast. What are we looking at in the future here, but also, what does the lending environment look like? Are we seeing loans go out? Last year, SBA loans were probably the easiest to get that we've ever seen. They've definitely tightened up this year a little bit. So we are seeing a little bit of restrictions on it. I know we've worked with several lenders who have come back to us. I mean, it's only May right now, and we've had several lenders come back to us and say, "Hey, we're all filled for the e-commerce vertical. We're not taking any more online businesses this year."
Wow.
So we're starting to see that restrict a little bit, and that will impact the acquisitions market and what you can get for your business. So that would be the big trend to look at.
So do you guys have anything to do with, I guess, I mean, you're brokering the deal, so you're bringing together the buyer and the seller. Do you help people on the financing, like trying to find the money to buy these businesses, or working with their lender to try and make sure that the business you're trying to sell checks those boxes?
Yeah, so we work with a lot of lenders, and we do. I mean, buyers will come to us, and if you're thinking about doing an acquisition and want to speak to some lenders, we're more than happy to refer some people that we've worked with. Again, we don't get kickbacks on this. These are just people that we've been able to close deals with before and have found them to be honest. But yeah, we will definitely help check those boxes. And most of the listings that we put out, we will let you know if it's pre-qualified for an SBA loan, which is just us looking at it and saying, will SBA approve the business side? SBA looks at two sides. They look at the business. Does the business justify a loan at this acquisition price? But then they're also going to look at the buyer. I can't pre-qualify the buyer, but I can put you in contact with the lender who can do the pre-qualification for you to say, yep, you should qualify just fine for this type of business.
Okay, so to that end, then, I mean, you mentioned that you don't do as much work with the buyers as you do with the client, or as the seller, but are there criteria or different things that you try and, I mean, you said you can't really pre-qualify the buyer, but like, are there things that you look for in a quality buyer before you make that match?
Well, it's got to be rough to kind of get into a situation with your client and you think you got a good buyer, and then it falls through. I'm sure, that's not pleasant to do. So is there, I guess, things, to Ryan's point, that you look at for the buyer's perspective?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. I mean, we talk about this quite a bit, right? And this factors into how do you stand out in such a competitive market? We have a great case study where we were selling. You guys know Optin Monster, right?
Sure.
All right. So the owner of Optin Monster, Syed Balki, we sold a couple of his businesses. We were selling one of his businesses, and we had two offers on the table, right? And the one that won was not the financially better better offer. I mean, it was close, but it was an SBA loan as opposed to a cash buyer, and it was not as much money, right? So why did he choose that buyer over somebody that was cash, which is an easier process and a little bit more cash at close? It all came down to the quality of the buyer, right? It all came down to the impression that buyer made. That buyer ended up coming into that transaction and really set the tone early on that I'm going to care about your business. I'm going to care about you. And I'm going to take care of this thing moving forward. And here's what I plan to do with it. He was responsive to us. He gave us really good feedback all along the way. And he took the time to realize again that he wasn't doing Saeed a favor, right? He was getting something very, very valuable. This is an exchange. I often tell the story, actually, that woman that I talked about who had the most organized business that I've ever dealt with, the person who bought that business from her, he said something after the first phone call, after we accepted his offer. We got on a call, said, great, we got a long road ahead of us for due diligence. And he said something along the way. He said, I want to thank you for selling your business to me. I really appreciate you choosing me. That did so much to build up goodwill between the two of them, which we needed later on when there were like some rough patches and like, oh, how are we going to overcome this? Well, you know what? At the core, they both liked each other, and that really helped quite a bit.
Yeah, I suppose it goes a long way if there's sort of mutual respect and everybody's working for the same cause. And, I mean, I guess this is the case with a lot of small business owners. I guess if you're not building your company, with the express purpose of selling it eventually, I suppose, for many people, these are their babies. Like this woman cared so much about her business because it was her baby. It was her thing that she'd built. And so to have somebody that might share that vision or, at least give the perception of being as into her business as she was, probably did go a long way in moving that along.
Well, I like to say that, look, the offers that we receive are usually based on the numbers that you put out, but the actual deal closes based off the trust between the buyer and the seller. And so part of that process of putting up the business for sale and going through that extensive due diligence process, sure, is checking boxes and doing that very analytical process on the buy side and even on the sell side. But there's also this aspect of, can I trust this person? Right? Can I trust that they've done a good job with their business on the buy side? And on the sell side, look, you're handing over valuable information. And especially first time around, it's a little hard to believe that somebody's going to write you a check for 6, 7, or even 8 figures. It can be a little hard to be like, this is actually going to happen, especially if you've gone through 2 months worth of due diligence, and documentation requests, and then they're asking for a whole new round of data. You're like, these guys are never going to pull the trigger. They just, they're always asking for more information. They don't want to actually close the business. So the trust part is really, really huge.
Do you have a preference or do you see a difference in the type of buyers, somebody that's going to borrow money or take a loan versus somebody who comes in with cash? Like, do you have a preference? I mean, you mentioned that it might be a little bit easier to make the sale with cash, but I guess in terms of quality of buyer or things like that, are you more apt to lean one way or another when you're helping your business or your client make the sale?
Yeah, I mean, cash buyers inherently have an advantage just because the deals are simpler. There's not as many people that are looking at the deal and not as many places where you're going to hear that no. If you're getting a bank loan, it's got to go through underwriting, and you're going to have some guy who you don't ever get to talk to who's going to be doing an evaluation on the business. From a buying standpoint, that's not a bad thing. That means you have a few extra sets of eyes looking at the business and making sure you're not doing something stupid. But from the sell side, obviously we want the transaction to go more smoothly and faster for our clients. So cash buyers do have something of an advantage, but I wouldn't, if I'm looking at 2 buyers and I got a cash buyer and he's a, absolute jerk versus an SBA buyer who is very nice, I'm still going to tell my client, go with the person who's really nice, because there's just so many things along the way that you have to negotiate from offer to close. That attitude makes a big difference.
So are you the number one person kind of handling that negotiation process, or do you kind of hand it off to the 2 parties and let them kind of figure it out?
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's a great question. So right up front, I'm very much that point person, and I'm there to act as a buffer. But as we get closer and closer to closing, I try to fade away, mainly because after the sale, you need to work with this person where I'm not going to be involved. And so there is a due diligence aspect both on the seller side and on the buyer side of, hey, do we work well together or work well enough? You don't have to be best buddies, but can you work well enough to get a transaction done and everything closed after the sale? So I will step back unless there's a need for me to really be involved. That doesn't mean that like I disappear. I'm there on every single conversation, but I may not be the point person on some of the last elements. That's something where I do tell people, okay, you should step up on this aspect or step up on that aspect and start to work on this. Where my role really comes in, I'm there again up front to help negotiate and make sure that we're getting the best deal possible. And then I'm going to advise my client as to what I think about the offers. But they're going to choose, right? My client chooses what they want to take, and that's completely their choice. And then later on, like, look, sometimes these deals get a little contentious. I'm there to be the psychiatrist. You can sit on the couch and tell me all the problems, why you hate the person that's buying your business. And if you're buying the business, you say why you hate the seller, and I'm going to sit there, I'll listen to it, because sometimes you just need to vent that way. So I'll be that middle person to absorb that. But my goal is to, again, if you're selling, my goal is to fulfill your goals. And if that's to sell the business, and I have a good idea of what criteria you need for that, to get you to that point, so that afterwards you can look back and say, yes, we got through all the hurdles, and I'm glad that I didn't let my emotions get the better of me, which it can happen. I'll tell you a quick story. I had Jason, who's one of my advisors. When I was selling his business, the person buying his business We were 2 days away from closing, and I called him about something pretty routine, but the business that we were selling just had like the worst sales days, like 3 consecutive sales days of just really poor sales in a row. So this guy was stressing out. And when I called him and asked him about, hey, can you get this over to us today? He let me have it. I mean, he chewed me out on the phone. I didn't know where this thing came from. I remember it still, I was in my car driving around. I'm like, holy cow, this guy's going crazy. And, I just said, all right. I'm like, that's fine. I'll call you later. I apologize. We'll talk later. I talked to him about 6 months later, and we were just kind of laughing. I'm like, yeah, you remember you yelling at me and all this? And he was like, what are you talking about? I never did that. I'm like, but yeah, no, you did. You completely chewed me out. But he didn't remember it, because it was just at that moment. And that's, that's one of the many roles that we hopefully play.
Yeah, no, that's I'm sure happens with some regularity. I mean, when you're talking this kind of money, and for a lot of people, this might be game-changing money for them. This could be the thing that changes their lives or sets them up for retirement or whatever. So, it's very important. Hey, Mark. So we're getting kind of to the end of our time with you. How can people learn more about you, get engaged, and where can they come find the podcast?
So you can find the podcast. It's called the Quiet Light Podcast. Find it anywhere you subscribe to podcasts. We're pretty much everywhere with that. We have a lot of resources on our website at quietlightbrokerage.com as well. And we do attend a lot of conferences and events, so you can always check us out and see if we're going to be showing up to any of those events. But if anyone wants to talk to me directly, you can email me, mark@quietlightbrokerage.com. And lastly, if you want us to do a valuation of your business, we're happy to do a valuation. It doesn't cost anything. And we don't tell you to sell your business or anything like that. It's really just kind of that check-in call for you to think about, okay, if I had to sell my business today, could I? Or maybe I want to consider doing it 3-4 years from now. What do I look like right now, and where am I going with the value? Really good, useful information. I've never had anybody come back and do a valuation and come back to me and say, boy, that was a waste of time. Usually what I get is, that was really, really useful. And I'm glad I've done that. So take advantage of that. You can go to our website, click on sell on there, and you can fill out the free valuation form. It's really short. And then one of us will contact you and set up a call, and we can go over, it's like a 15 to 20 minute phone call where we go over your business and help you identify what it's worth and what it could be worth and what's great about it and maybe what you need to work on.
Yeah, that's awesome. Super helpful, I think. So thanks to everybody who tuned in on the live stream. For the people who've been leaving comments, things like that, thanks so much. You can catch this episode at eggscast.com. You can find Mark over at quietlightbrokerage.com, and it's spelled just like it sounds. And I think that's it. So thanks everybody for tuning in and listening, and have a great week. Thanks, Mark.
Thanks, guys.